friends, picture this setting is the frigid part of the Cold War, and we have two systems, East versus West, totalitarianism, communism versus democracy, freedom. One country representing the West, one country representing the East, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. But this isn't a battle on a field of battle. It is a battle on the field of play in sport. In fact, the field of play in this particular instance is not a field at all, but the ice. Now, one would be forgiven to think that I might be referring to the 1980 Winter Olympics, the USA semifinal game versus the Soviet Union, but one would be mistaken. And if one did believe that, one probably isn't Canadian. What I'm looking at today, my friends, is the 1972 Summit Series, where Canada held the torch for the Western world. Now, in the name itself, Summit Series implies that this is a game of goodwill against two opposition systems of government in a Cold War in which nuclear missiles were aimed, NATO versus the Soviet bloc. Canada certainly had missiles aimed at it. And insofar as the public intent, these are games of goodwill, but they meant so much more, because each side was playing for pride. The Soviets in particular thought that sport was one way to prove to the world that their system was the right one and that was superior. And so within that context, my friends, I am so excited to be looking at the Summit Series. Now, for those of you who have watched the channel before, you know I'm a hockey fan. And unlike baseball, where I'm a third generation baseball fan, Yankee fan on my father's side, I have the family lore and the family history of my grandfather's experiences going to Yankee games as a little boy, etc. I don't have that with hockey because I came to hockey all on my own in the late 1970s. I was born in 71, and growing up, there was a fledgling NHL expansion team, the New York Islanders, that I fell in love with in the late 70s. And of course, by the 80s, they had become a dynasty by the early 80s. And so my, let's say, historical and institutional and family history of hockey isn't there. I built it all on my own. My children certainly have it from me, but I came to it all on my own. And so, of course, I, as a little boy in 1980, was very excited to see the USA defeat the Soviet Union on the Miracle on Ice, to go on and beat Sweden for the gold cup, the gold medal during that wonderful series. And so, in discussing hockey in the past, some of you, and relaying that nostalgia to you of that, a lot of you had said that I should check out the Summit Series. And frankly, if I had heard of it, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure if I had ever heard of it. I certainly didn't know anything about it. What I do know, and just looking at it real quick to do this reaction, was an 8-game series, and a lot of people had suggested that maybe I should watch the entirety of Game 8, which was extremely exciting. I assume that means Canada won that game, but I have been really avoiding trying to look at anything or read anything in depth about the Summit Series other than that. I know what happened. I know it was epic. I know it was 8 games. I know half the games took place in Canada and half in the Soviet Union. And other than that, I didn't really know much. I was curious about why 8 games, an even number. And then it occurred to me it was probably because neither country wanted to have the odd number of games or lesser games in their country, and that was probably what was negotiated. So I know Canada won the last game. I have no idea if the series was tied, if Canada won the series, if I don't know. Were there ties in this series, or did the rules call for no ties and for there to be overtime or a shootout, penalties to decide a match? I really don't know. I can't imagine, or maybe goal differential, because I can't imagine the possibility of the series ending with no winner, with 4-4. Somebody has to win, right? So having said that, let's take a look at the Summit series. I've been so interested in doing it. In order to do it right, there have been a couple of videos that were very short, but I am going to watch a hour and 20-minute long documentary. I will split it up into a few parts so that it's manageable in bite sizes for a YouTube video. Okay, my friends, without further ado, let's get to the Summit series.
September 28th, 1972. It's Game 8 of hockey's Summit Series. The best of Canada against the best of the Soviet Union. After 7 games, each side has 3 wins and a tie.
Oh.
In Canada, the entire country is virtually shut down. The nation's cultural identity on the line.
I thought that was Peter Coyote. He's great at narrating these documentaries.
The Soviets pull ahead after 2 periods, 5-3. Frustration mounts. During the intermission, the goaltender Ken Dryden says to himself, "In 20 minutes, I will be the most hated man in Canada."
It was the ultimate test of the 2 hockey superpowers.
Those guys were playing with passion. Everybody knew that it's a war.
Now they're pointing at each other back to the net. Lee is totally incensed at this call.
2 hostile economic and political systems, capitalism versus communism.
Who was that?
We're not going to lose. No way we're going to lose.
This was for the prestige of the country. We are the world champions.
I was like a man possessed.
Really the hardest fought game I think I've seen in years. Down on that ice, it's just sheer war. These 2 teams are going at it. They're not sparing.
The Cold War, the us against them attitude was exactly what this turned out to be.
For 4 long decades, from the end of World War II to the crumbling of the Berlin Wall, ideological differences and military muscle threatened the very existence of the modern world.
At this moment, the missile force of the United States begins to get ready to hurl its thermonuclear warheads at targets halfway across the world.
The United States and the world's other great superpower, the Soviet Union, engaged in a real and terrifying Cold War that reached the entire free world and communist bloc.
He tells the delegates, the sun of communism is rising. Our forces have never been so powerful.
In time, even technological achievements like sending the first man into space took on dramatic overtones. Success in sport was especially important to the Soviets. They viewed winning as an affirmation of the communist system. And their triumphs frustrated not only the United States, but other Western countries as well. Especially one country obsessed with one sport. Hockey is Canada's game. It's played from coast to coast, in small towns and big cities, on ponds and rivers and rinks, both indoors and out. The history and heritage of the game is ingrained in the culture, and success on the ice is expected. In the first 7 Olympics, the Canadians won 6 gold medals.
Not a surprising stat to me.
But starting in 1956, the Soviet Union began to dominate the game on the world stage. Year after year, tournament after tournament, the subsidized amateurs of the Soviet national team beat
amateurs. Not at all. I mean, they were the best of the best in their country, and to their credit, they took on hockey as a sport that they became very good at. But in addition to that, they played a different style of game, and you know, the ice was bigger. They were fast. They passed a lot more, checked less, fought almost not at all. It was just a different game. And so I'm very curious, like in 1972, if they were playing that style of game back then and what the Canadian style was. I also did notice in some of the, you know, snippets that they were just showing there, I did recognize a few NHL hockey greats. And I think I saw Phil Esposito. And so this obviously where the Canadians were playing their NHL greats, and I assume that, you know, what I do know about the Soviet system is that this was a team. This was a team that played all the time together. It wasn't like you took a bunch of all-stars and put them together. And I know from watching, you know, the some of the Dream Team basketball experiences, it doesn't always work out well when you're putting these great superstars together that hadn't been a team before. And hadn't played that much as a team, in order to really build team cohesion.
Beat on the Canadians like a maddening drum. And by 1972, after winning their third consecutive Olympic gold medal, the Soviets were eager to prove just how good they really were.
The first glimmer of a possibility of a Canada-Soviet hockey series really came in a strange way. There was a little clue embedded in a column by a sports columnist in Pravda, the official organ of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. And one of the...
Ironically, Pravda in Russian, I believe, means truth.
young officers at the Canadian Embassy in Moscow had the job of reading the Russian papers, and he came across this suggestion that perhaps the Soviet national hockey team needed a new challenge. They had won 10 world championships in a row. There was no longer any challenge for them in Europe, and perhaps it was time that they faced the famous professionals of the National Hockey League. This Canadian diplomat realized that there'd never be something like this in the paper in Moscow unless there was an official sanction for it. So he went to see the columnist in question.
So they had some vodka and they talked about it, and that was where the idea was born, to have a series of Canada's best versus the Soviet best.
Turn to fly.
And to demonstrate what Canada's best was like, he actually showed footage of the 1971 Stanley Cup Finals.
Forcing a seventh and deciding game back.
And oddly enough, that turned out to be hugely popular in the Soviet Union. Millions of people saw it. The army distributed it. It just sort of snowballed.
With government on both sides willing to facilitate a series, then it was just a matter of the NHL to let its players be available for a series of so-called friendly matches. That's how they were referred to, exhibition games. You know, nothing at stake, no trophy, no championship, except that everybody knew that it was going to be the ultimate test of the two hockey superpowers. Canadians shared the American view
and the two competing systems in the Cold War.
To a great extent, that the Soviet Union was the enemy. The superpower that had the missiles pointed straight at our cities. We just saw them as that kind of scary place where they paraded their missiles through Red Square on May Day every year, and that was a suggestion that they were out to get us.
The Politburo asked us to guarantee a good result. This was for the prestige of the country. We are the Olympic champions. We are the world champions.
Hockey was the face that Canada wished the world to see. The world's going to pay total attention to us because this is the second most important country in the world we're playing, and we're going to smoke them. So the really was our equivalent of the moon.
And how was one way that Soviet athletes tried to guarantee results? Cheating, particularly by the use of banned performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, and such.
Landing.
These were not only hockey matches, but also a meeting of two opposite systems. And of course, it was apparent that everything had to be settled.
This series was going to be a capitalism versus communism. It really was the free world trying to prove that its way of doing things, as expressed in how it played hockey, was superior to the Marxist system of command and control. And the Soviet people and government were just as interested in proving the opposite, that their system was in fact superior, as proven by the prowess of their hockey team. So they were both entering on quite an unknown adventure that took on this enormous symbolic significance that was far beyond an athletic contest.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the point I was making in the beginning, not that it's not an obvious point. It is. I'm no genius for pointing it out before they did. This is exciting. Ooh, I like it. Must have been so exciting at the time.
The structure of the Summit Series was simple. 8 games, 4 in each country, played in September of 1972 prior to the NHL season. The Canadian team, 35 of the country's best professional players, was assembled by Alan Eagleson, a bombastic lawyer from Toronto who represented many of the game's greatest stars. Recognizable names familiar to fans both north and south of the border. Phil Esposito and his brother Tony, Bobby Clark, Ken Dryden, Pete Mahavlich, Rod Gilbert. Even without Bobby Orr, who was injured.
Rod Gilbert died not that long ago, a year or two ago, in New York City. I guess he was still connected to the Rangers for a long time in their back office.
Or superstar Bobby Hull, who had left the NHL for the fledgling World Hockey Association. The firepower on the team was undeniable and unprecedented. The preparation, however, was altogether different.
I had been working for a company in upstate New York who had just filed for bankruptcy, and I found myself out of a job. I got a call a day or two later from Alan Eagleson. He asked if I would be interested in being the GM coach of the team, and I certainly was. There was no place else for me to go at that time.
I was in Flin Flon in the summer, and Al Eagleson called me and asked if I'd like to.
I think some of you told me in prior comments when I was looking at the Tragically Hip, and Gord Downie was wearing a Boston Bruins jersey in one of his videos, and I asked, "Oh, interesting that he's a Boston fan, being that they're from Ontario." And somebody told me that Harry Sinden was his godfather. I think it was.
Join Team Canada, and I said yes, I sure would, and tell me where to be and what time to get there. It was certainly an honor to wear the Canadian jersey, but it was also supposed to be a bit of a vacation almost.
In those days, we didn't do anything. I mean, the season would be finished probably the first part of May or April, and we didn't put on the skates up until September.
Camp would be 6 weeks, and during that training camp period, you would then get into shape or get as close to getting into shape as possible for your NHL season. So for us, with the series starting September the 2nd, we didn't have very much time to prepare.
I really thought it was going to be like an all-star game, and we were going to have some laughs and fun. The training camp.
I don't think I've seen Phil Esposito as an older man. I mean, he looks good, but he does look different. What was I think? Oh, the thought I was going to say is that it's interesting what they're saying. Again, I sort of made that point before that I didn't know what their training schedule or anything like that was, but I think the point they're making here is they didn't really have a whole lot of time to become a cohesive team. But it is interesting that they're using, that this was, the Soviets up against the best of the best of, the NHL stars, these massively successful, talented Canadian professional hockey players. Whereas, in the Olympics up until 15 years ago, something like that, I don't remember, we were not using professionals, especially in the West. We were using amateurs, and, we were up against, before the fall of the Soviet Union and the communist bloc, we were up against professionals against countries like Czechoslovakia, or when it was Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, etc.
Camp was a joke. We didn't really train hard. We really didn't. I didn't. I made jokes about saying that the closest to the ice I got was the ice in my vodka. But I can tell you this, we had a good time. We really did.
It was supposed to be a cakewalk for Canada.
Gosh, how good can they be? I mean, we have so many skilled players on our team. I mean, it won't take very long, maybe, 2-3 days, and then, we'll be in shape.
And we're going to make a beautiful team, and we're going to just roll past them and beat them badly.
I really felt that we would overwhelm them.
The Canadian attitude was bordering on smugness and certainly arrogance before the series began. You're operating here in the arena of national myth. We had invented hockey, and we had the best players in the world. We had no equal. Everyone thought it was high time that we put those Ruskies in their place, because they were going around calling themselves world champions.
In the summer of 1972, when they told us that an agreement was reached to play the series, I personally didn't feel all that much hype. Okay, they've agreed. Okay, we'll play. We were already with our clubs preparing for the Soviet Championship. It wasn't like, oh my, we have to go in the early fall and play the professionals. No, it was the normal process of preparation. We were assembled 2 weeks before the start of the series in mid-August for a centralized type of camp and started to prepare together.
Wow, a real case of, overconfidence and underestimating the opponent.
I mean, we didn't care about them. We had so much firepower. It really didn't matter what they put out there. Yeah, I knew they were good hockey players, but we were going to be so much better. We are the best in the world, and how are they going to beat the best in the world?
But what's strange, before this series, there were no pep talks from the bosses, even the sports bosses. They treated us very gingerly and with some fear. Maybe they were afraid we were really going to lose all 8 games, like the Canadians said we would, and all would be blowouts.
The predictions in the media were quite outlandish. Many so-called hockey experts were predicting a clean sweep.
The headlines were, 8-0 for Canada. Dick Beddoes, the great writer in Toronto, said if the Soviets win 1 game, he would take his column, dip it in borscht, and eat it on the front steps of City Hall in Toronto. But there was no chance. Everybody, 8-0, maybe 7.
Did he? Did he live up to that promise?
1.
People were relishing the prospect of trouncing the Soviets, of absolutely whipping them and showing them who was best. But at the same time, there was an air of mystery. The Soviet Union was this other planet, and so when these players arrived and they skated out on the ice of the Canadian Forum, they had funny-looking, tight-fitting small helmets, red helmets that they wore that bore a strange resemblance to the cosmonauts' headgear. There was a real sense of mystery about who they were, and it was going to be a great entertainment.
That's right. 1972, no NHL players were wearing helmets, and then they had these little helmets on. It must have seemed funny.
On September 2nd, 1972, in front of a welcoming and confident Canadian crowd, the Summit Series opened at the home of hockey, the Forum in Montreal.
Boy, this is going to be fun. You know, Pierre Trudeau got out there, and I remember him dropping the puck, and I whooped it back, and I went, hey, I won the face-off.
There's the official face-off.
And I don't know who took the face-off against me. I have no idea whether it was Mikhailov, ugliness. Boris Mikhailov, you know, he has to sneak up on a glass of water to drink it. That's how ugly this guy is.
I could care less about that. They didn't have to like me. I was doing my job.
I didn't care. And I was joking around. I was having a good time. I really was.
Halfway around the world, the sense of anticipation was just as real.
When the series started, it was, in September of 1972. I watched it on a small, tiny black and white TV in our kitchen. Then they started to introduce the players, and they introduced Team Russia. It was like really polite cheers, it was really quiet. And then they started to introduce Team Canada. And you know what? I thought it was like an earthquake.
I bet.
And then they started to name these players, Phil Esposito, and then it was really crazy, just like watching a cartoon or something. They greeted these players as if they were like, superheroes or something. And all of them were chewing gum, which was totally taboo by Russian standards. That's like drinking booze in subway or something. You don't chew gum in public. And here you see these guys, which are totally open and chew their gum, smile, and think that they're kings of the world.
For the start, and the face-off, and the game is underway with Petrov having cleared it into the Canadian zone. There's the pass from Lino. Big stop. Here's a shot right in front of it. Score!
When Team Canada scored, I think it was 30 seconds in the game, and it was 1-0. It just and everybody thought that's it.
And after 30 seconds, scored a first goal. I said, oh man, we're going to have a good time here.
Back to Henderson.
The first 5 minutes, we're up 2-0. Oh, this is going to be fun.
Oh, wow. It does look like a trouncing so far.
This is going to be very easy.
Well, the beginning of the game made us disheartened and discouraged us. I personally thought that was it. To make things worse, the organ plays the funeral march.
I'm thinking to myself, maybe we should just take it easy. We don't want to embarrass anybody here, Let's just put on a good show. Let's put on a good show.
It ain't over until it's over.
Boy.
We thought it's over, just like it's nothing. And then the miracle happened.
Vladiev trying to clear to the corner. It's got it right in front. It's score! Back to Mikhailov, right in the clear. Oh, right in. It's score!
1 goal, 2 goals, beautiful. And then, of course, the whole house was yelling, yes, 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 yes.
We did start playing our game, and we were successful. The Canadians couldn't keep up with us.
Varlamov moves down over the line, cutting in around Ori. A shot, he scores! Varlamov went right around the Canadian defense, Ori.
Varlamov, he scored this beautiful goal, which made the Team Canada NHL defensemen looked like they were a bunch of old-timers, playing hockey, because he was doing with them whatever he wanted to.
Varlamov, a very tricky player, he scores! Varlamov let a bullet drive go, and if he tried, he's to the top left-hand corner.
Valery Kharlamov scored 2 goals back-to-back in that game that were both individual rushes. I mean, they were worthy of, the Montreal Canadiens at their best, a Maurice Richard or a Jean Beliveau. So it quickly became clear that the stereotype of this rigid, robotic style of play was quite wrong.
All of a sudden, I'm watching this. I had never seen so many good players on one team.
Valery Kharlamov, who was number 17, could skate faster than anybody on the ice. He had greater balance than anybody on the ice. He had a great shot, and it was impossible for the Canadians to keep up with him. And Boris Mikhailov was the same way. He's a craggy, crusty-faced old Soviet player. Yakishev, he was his.
So this is all very interesting, and I think that this is sort of what I was saying before, that the Soviet style, and I wasn't sure if it was that way as early as 1972, was very much a lot of athleticism in fast skating and maneuverability, and I think they even like had to take ballet lessons and such, and which absolutely helps with agility and balance. Yeah, no, that this is very interesting, and let's not forget that the Soviets had a very institutionalized system of doping. So, to what extent that also came into play in their strength, speed, and agility.
Pure hockey player as you could ever imagine. He had everything, every skill you'd ever want to see in a great hockey player.
Sadrin, a roller right in front, they score! Yakishev cutting right in front.
It was a moving style of play. They never really stood still. Their players were moving all the time. It was kind of confusing for us.
Lino comes right back to the Soviet. Passes to Mihailov, coming in on goal. Oh, he scores!
We look at each other like, what is going on out there?
We were not prepared for this. And they just kept coming.
By the middle of the first period, everything was in its proper place. We were outplaying them and showing them the kind of hockey they had never seen in their lives. I am 100% sure of that.
And their transition game was unnerving. I mean, we would go down, and before we knew it, they were going the other way twice as fast.
They're closing in. Seaman gets right in, he scores!
We had exhausted ourselves to the level physically that we couldn't even understand the different game that they were presenting us.
Team Canada right now, they've given it their best, and they aren't good enough tonight to beat the Soviets. As simple as that.
The trouble was they underestimated their opponent. Let's say, if I can make a comparison here, the miracle of ice. That was the opposite situation when Team Russia actually underestimated this bunch of students from the United States. So it was almost the same situation, but reverse.
It was demoralized us, and we were embarrassed.
They got humiliated in the first game. They lost to these guys. No one doesn't even know their names. Who are those guys, It was unbelievable, unthinkable.
And the USSR have defeated Canada by a score of 7-3.
We won 7-3, but could have scored at least 5 more goals. No doubt. No doubt.
In the end, they didn't even shake hands with the Russians. It's like, in Russia, it's a tradition. When you're done with the game, the players shaking their hands and then go to their locker rooms. But at this, Canada just left. Just animal.
Wow. That must have been a shock. And it's shocking, too, that they started off the game so well. 3-0 in the first few minutes, and then all of a sudden, the floodgates open.
The laws, they don't even have enough dignity and, just...
Question, were they playing on larger ice, like the international size, the whole tournament, or was the ice size smaller in Canada, like the NHL size, and larger when they went to the Soviet Union?
I'd like to say thank you, for the beautiful game.
The sense of shock that set in right across Canada from coast to coast was profound.
We were tremendously disappointed. Even my brother, after the first game, he comes up to me, he says, "What happened?" I says, "Listen, I bought you a ticket to see the game. Didn't you watch it? You see how good they are?" He says, "Well, I want you to know you're a disgrace to your country."
These total aliens could come over and lick our best professionals. It was just a disillusioning moment. People saw right away that, we're in a fight here. We're in a war that's not going to be so easy to win.
The morning after the huge...
Wowzer, Weezer, Wozer, my friends. That is, that's incredible. I'm about a half hour in. You know what? Let's do a little bit more before we stop the first segment.
huge Soviet victory and huge or even Canadian defeat. I was on the turbo train going between Montreal and Toronto, and I was sitting next to Alan Eagleson, the Players Association head who had put this game together. Who walks down the aisle but Murray Dryden, the goalie's father, Ken Dryden's father. Murray Dryden is this avuncular, big guy, very charitable figure. He looks at Eagleson and he yells at him, "You suckered us." And Eagleson jumps up, gets over me, climbs over me, and gets face to face with Ken Dryden's father. And Dryden's father is yelling at him, "You told us these guys weren't very good." Here was a guy whose son was embarrassed in a 7-goal debacle. If these two intelligent guys could come to this, what about the average Canadian? And I realized
Ken Dryden must have felt absolutely awful. I mean, it's never just the goalie's fault, and he probably wasn't accustomed to their style. You know what kind of is reminding me of the way they're talking about the way the Soviets were playing and their positioning, and they're always moving, is something that that the great one Wayne Gretzky said at some point, and I'm paraphrasing, guys, so don't kill me if I'm getting this wrong, but something like, one of the things that made him great was knowing to skate where the puck was going to be, and being there. And that kind of, to me, is reminding me what they're saying here, is that these guys were just very fast and athletic. They were moving around, and it wasn't necessarily just about the guy who had the puck, but about positioning themselves, right in a way that was super quick and athletic, to the point where it just confused them because it was something they were unaccustomed to.
the impact that this thing had on this whole country.
Dryden certainly wasn't the only humiliated Canadian after Game 1. As promised, the legendary hockey writer Dick Beddoes, who predicted that Canada would sweep the series, soaked his column in borscht and promptly ate his words. Like most everyone else, he was surprised to learn just how good the Soviets were, especially their goaltender.
Vladislav Tretiak, who was the goalie of Team USSR, who was only 20 at this time. And if you really think about someone who was underestimated, it was Tretiak. During the preparation for the series, Team Canada sent their scouts to Moscow to watch, what are these Russians? Who are they? Who are their stars? How are they playing?
On top of the regular scouting report that they would do on any team, we've asked them to specifically...
I was actually surprised to hear Tretiak was on the team as early as 72.
Give us a report on the Russian power play and the method they use to kill penalties when they're shorthanded, and also to give us a pretty good book on their goaltenders.
They came back and, they're okay, and their forwards are okay, their defense are so-so, and they have a terrible goalie over there. But they didn't know one thing, that the game was played the day after Tretiak got married.
Oh, I didn't even really want to play because of my wedding. So I had my head elsewhere, of course. Yes, they came to watch us, and I allowed 8 or 9 goals. They thought, we'll score as many as we want on him. That was the opinion they took home.
He was playing with a severe...
How could you take one game as an example and a good scout, shouldn't they know, sort of the context? If he had just gotten married the day before, he was probably hungover on lots of vodka. I've been to a Russian wedding. Oh, my Lord, the amount of vodka that's just everywhere.
Hangover. At least that was the excuse given by the Russians. Some Canadians began to wonder if maybe it hadn't been a deliberate attempt to sucker the scout into thinking that the goaltending was no good. But Tretiak certainly was far, far better than anyone had expected. Also a very handsome young man whom a lot of Canadian females became very enamored of.
Here's a shot, and Tretiak covered the angle beautifully.
Team Canada's lopsided loss in the first game clearly showed that its talented players were woefully out of game shape. And perhaps even worse, prisoners to an outdated system of organized hockey they had spent their whole lives perfecting.
Strange as it may sound, Canadians had never thought about their game. They just played it. And so that it was a game that was basically invented every time the puck dropped. Go after your opponent. play physical, play hard, try and get the puck, try and score goals.
They didn't ever consider that there might be entirely other ways of playing the game. And then you come up against 5-man units? No one had ever heard of anything like that. Rotating players where you have the forwards going back, taking the place along the blue line and looping around, cycling in corners. Never even heard of it, never imagined it.
In Russian hockey or European hockey, it's about being fast and smart, and it's about team.
You know, it's funny. This is just part of it that I didn't really ever know about the development of the game, and certainly the Soviet style has influenced the way the game is played today.
It's about when people are trained together for a long, long time, they can play with each other with a blindfolded because they know where their partner is, they feel them. And one of the things that Soviet hockey contributed to the game of hockey was the methodology, training methodology, the selection of players. At the very early age, you go to auditions, you take your skates, you take your stick, and the best coaches are looking at you, looking at how well you're coordinated, your strength and flexibility, and at the very early age, you're being filtered by the coaches. And they select you, and then they kind of mentor you for many years.
The Soviet hockey system was almost created from scratch. They didn't play hockey until after the Second World War. The great architect of Soviet hockey was a man named Anatoly Tarasov, who was kind of a hockey intellectual. He watched film of NHL games, and he thought about, well, how could you design a better hockey player? You had to have super conditioning, strength training, develop his skating skills, and all of those kind of fundamentals before you even got to the question of, handling the puck and shooting the puck. That could all come later, but first you had to build the bionic man.
Of course, there was a system. It was a system of training and everything. There was very little distance running, mainly barbells with weights and jumping exercises. We carried each other, crawled. With Tarasov, those things were done willingly by the guys, and they actually liked to do them. Like the exercise called Kill a Canadian. You needed to hit the boards at full speed, go down on one knee, get up, and hit the boards again. Yes, kill a Canadian. That's what they called it. Oh, jokingly, of course.
Well, of course.
The kind of training I had to endure, nobody else could. Even skaters were feeling sorry for me. You won't die a natural death, they said, because of the kind of workload I had to go through.
You didn't just play hockey all the time. You used other sports to develop eye-hand coordination and agility and speed. He equipped them with these rubber belts that weighed 25 pounds. He had them living in barracks-style environment, and he was able to control their lives so that they just lived and ate and breathed hockey.
All right, my friends, this seems like a good place to stop and somewhat of a cliffhanger to see how the Canadians respond to the loss and to the shock of how good the Soviets were in their different system, change things up, and what happens in the next couple of games. I am very excited to get to the rest of this, and I hope you stick with me on this journey, my friends. This was wonderful. All right, stay tuned for part 2. Take care.